Scott Hensler from this is Scott Hensler from Friday, July the 13th, 2018. Scott Hensler. Check out the links below the video. Thank you for listening.
2018, Scott Hensler, Tinfoil Hat Club. Well, as you know, I'm in a new location. I'm in the desert. Hopefully the transmission is making it out there. I had some trouble with the satellite system. It's not exactly what I want, but I guess it's what I want to live with. And so as I continue these shows, I'm going to try to do the best that I can here. Tonight, the actor, the selling of the soul, altering of one's personality, the changing of the guard, so to speak, meaning that in this of switching from one personality to another. Now, you can do this on command as an actor, but unfortunately what I want to go into tonight is those who have done such things over the years have not been able to switch back. A lot of the actors that we see that have taken their lives, that have overdosed from drugs or other means such as ritual, that in this, that they have gone to a point of no return. And I'm going to be giving some examples tonight of those actors that we're familiar with, especially back in the 80s on through the 90s and even up to today. And so when we open up our soul, when we open up our spirit, this is one of the reasons of not to get into divination. This is one of the reasons not to involve yourself in witchcraft, have nothing to do with sorcery. Those that have gone to hypnotists wanting to quit smoking or to lose weight have found themselves never being the same people again. I've had spouses come to me that say that they convinced their husband or their wife to go to a hypnotist, and now they don't even know the individual, ending up in divorce. So when you switch, when you do something that allows the spirit in, this is an opening for a Trojan horse to come in. There may be a feeling of relief, there may be a feeling of euphoria, there may even be a fear of panic that only lasts for a short time. But on the long term, it is a never-ending spiral downhill of destruction of your mind, your spirit, your soul. And because of this, many of the people out there today, especially those that have been involved in drugs or tampered in the occult, they find this to be true. And so Hollywood is absolutely no exception. When we think of actors, we think of Hollywood. We think of stage plays, we think of New York, we think of Broadway. But in either case, these are those who are pretending to be someone else. And when they do that, the problem is that some of them do not come back. So as I point out tonight, the loss of ability to do so, meaning to come back, forever trapped in the character, sometimes never returning to oneself, can be absolutely terrifying, because you know there's a lot of horror movies out there. Even some of the themes or some of the storylines can be one that do not appear to be so bad. But if that was your character in your life that just continually evolved, very much like Groundhog Day, and you remember that movie, where you're in your own hell, continuing the same thing over and over again, this can cause people to end their life from such pain. Now remember, Hollywood is the devil's playground. And in order to play their game, you play by the devil's rules. And the human selected bunch that stand in proxy for the devil himself to lure, to entrap, to bring those in, know as Jewish producers and directors, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, that is the case, that is the truth. That Hollywood is run by the Jews, has been from day one. It is a point of promoting debauchery, promoting filth, pornography, changing of our altering of reality of the world. This has been their goal. Los Angeles, Hollywood, stand right in the middle of all this. It is tainted. It is tainted ground with the blood of thousands sacrificed over the years. Whether it was the 27 Club, whether it was a ritual bloodletting, whether it is something where when you when you enter into this particular group of individuals, you may actually sacrifice a family member or someone that you love. And so if you look at a lot of the stars, most of them, in fact, you'll find that there's tragedy in every family, whether it was a child, whether it was a spouse, whether it was a girlfriend, someone that had been with for a long time, or a boyfriend. In either case, there's very strange circumstances that surround all of that. And so in rituals, sometime willingly, but mostly against their will, thinking that they're going to achieve greatness, that the bottom line, Hollywood and its demonic people are possessed because they sold their soul. Now, there's also the instance or the understanding that a lot of them may be replaced, clones with hybrids, which I believe is a case. I believe that Hillary Clinton, you can pick one of 3 or 4 that we saw during the candidacy, that in this situation that the clones do not last very long. They haven't quite perfected them to be something long term. And so in public, they'll switch off, they'll fall, they'll degrade, they'll come apart. And then next thing you know, you see the next one, or potentially even the original. But in most cases, the real one is probably on a beach somewhere sucking on a Mai Tai, and or sold their soul and their conscience, their essence has been uploaded into an AI system. And in either way, that this can be then downloaded. But every time they do this, there's a degrade, a degradation. There is a loss. There is a issue with the new one, that they're temperamental. They have predisposed, defined personalities that can be irritable. And so a lot of them are controlled very closely. They're monitored, and they're not even allowed to be out. And when one does get out, then again, they're either drugged up. This is why you see them intoxicated. This is why you see them under drugs. So by doing so, they are fooling millions of United States people and the rest of the world. But their message is the great demise. And that is that anything goes. Debauchery, transsexual, bisexual, homosexual, anything that is one that we would call, that would be in the classification of sodomy, is now accepted. And because it has been accepted, that means that as they spew their spirits out, the general population receive them, making things to appear one way when in reality they're another. And so when I have interviewed many, many people who have been in homosexuality, they were not happy. They were never fulfilled. There was something ever, yearning for to be accepted, to be loved, or never satisfied. And so they would take things to another level that actually was another open door to another demonic realm. And so we've talked about cannibalism. We've talked about crimes of passion, of killing, of even mutilation, sexually mutilating. This can be prevalent amongst the male homosexuals. And I've talked about in cases in the past when I was doing law enforcement that in many cases, along with homicides, we were looking for weapons that were used to castrate. We were looking for items that were used to slash throats. We were looking for things that were used to impale. And a lot of times, since this was in the Arizona area, Phoenix, for instance, being surrounded by deserts, that's where the search would take us. So anyways, when we look at actors, Jesus Christ referred to them as hypocrites or hypocrisy. The point of it is to say one thing but yet be another, which now is the mainstay of our political system and educational system, and the main spirit basically found behind liberalism. Now, those who listen to the show that may be liberals, I know that it makes you mad that I talk about it. Believe me, those who call themselves conservatives, I bash just as much. And the point of it is hypocrisy. The point of it is to say one thing and do another. The one to say that I believe in this, but then turn around and act like you do not believe, or that you have some other agenda or constitution. which we also see hypocrisy in the Christian church. This is why I do not attend anymore. This is why I will not go into that big building that has a big T on it. Now, I say that in joking because of a show that I saw. There is nothing funny about what Jesus Christ did on the cross. But the point of it is Jesus is off the cross. And so when we look at the church that uses religion, when we see the steeple, actually that is a phallic symbol of a male unit. And then on top of it is the cross. So in either case, when you look at a church, whether you look at one that has a spire like a Mormon church who says that Jesus was impaled, but in either case, this is all mockery. This is all hypocrisy of the true meaning of Jesus Christ. And so when we see the opposition of liberalism coming against conservatism, it's actually just a left-right paradigm of nothing that brings satisfaction or clarity or finalization or truth. It's nothing but a dog chasing its own tail. So with this, when we see hypocrisy, when we see those that say that they are in Jesus Christ or that they believe onto Jesus Christ, but yet do not believe in the Great Commission, again, this is that spirit behind it. And believe me, with that is deception. Before I get going, I want to thank again everyone for your support. I was off for a while, moving the office and the studio, and I'm done with it now, trying to get everything tweaked in. I did have some technical issues with the phone this week. I apologize. I'm just so far behind that maybe I burned the lines up. I don't know with all the calls, but I think it's straightened out. I'll get back on Tuesday. So these things, I believe, are now resolved, and as I continue, please be patient with me. All right, there's a lot going on out there, basically in theater and politics, staging once again the division of America. Now, again, this needed to take place for the Civil War, and of course, there's been talk of martial law. There's been talk of Civil War. The liberalism who hate Trump so badly that they, basically slough at the mouth. Well, again, this is all one of trickery. This is all one of smoke and mirrors. Just as trying to portray that a large percentage of America is homosexual, that's actually not the case. And so with this then comes either to hate or love it. And when you have such a thing, you can have an individual who wants to be friends with those who hate it, but yet yourself you love it. You're torn between this, and so you compromise. You sell yourself out. So are those in the middle of the fence that there'll be a time that they'll have to choose sides. And just like the Civil War, there was a time where you were given, I forget a couple weeks, a month through, that if you were a Southerner and you believed in the North, then you traveled to the North. You had a time that you were allowed to do this, and then it all came down. So with liberal actors pretending to urinate Donald Trump's star on Hollywood Boulevard, again, is one only to infuriate the conservatives. This is only to spark hatred, dissent, anger, rage, and by the most part, they've actually done a pretty good job. So even moving on to London, where there's balloons that look like Trump, being motive of an actor pig or a child pig, that in this, again, we need to understand that England, or London in itself, was one that really tried to tear this country apart in Civil War. They played a very large part in that, along with French, along with the Catholic Church, along with Jews. I bet you didn't know that. Did you ever see the book that came out a couple of years ago, The Letters of the Jews to Lincoln? You ought to look into that sometime. You'd be a little surprised at what was really going on. But in either case, again, trying to cause division. And so the home base for this is Hollywood. This continues on even to today, through the movies, through TV, through commercials, through even owning of the newspapers and the magazines. And so as I continue on with the actor, let's start with the movie Friday the 13th, since it happens to be the 13th of Friday. These were slasher films, even becoming franchises because it became so popular. the killing of another human being, the slaughtering of a teenager, the decapitation, the causing an individual to bleed out or to die horribly through being maimed, that by the millions, people came to the theaters in the 70s and the 80s to see this type of action. And with it was a great deal of money made. And so this was one of the reasons that the movie Halloween came to cash in with this success with Jamie Lee Curtis, who was only 20 at the time in 1978. Now, she came from a very colorful family. Janet Leigh and Tommy, was it Tommy Curtis? And so what we have is an individual who was born in Hollywood with the occult influences, with all the fame, with all of the recognition, that one that had to live up to this type of environment. And I'm not a basic Jamie Lee Curtis, because I saw her one time on the red carpet humiliate a young reporter. She cut him down, and the way she humiliated him told me who she really was, and I haven't been able to look at her the same. And this was long before I really came to the understanding of what's really going on in Hollywood. So it must have been a very interesting life for Jamie Lee Curtis. Now notice the word Lee, L-E-E, with this, that you'll find that whenever you have the word Lee, you'll have counterfeit, you'll have lie, you'll have deception, you'll have things that are used in red flags, or those things that are to give the appearance of one thing and another. When you look at gematria, when you punch these numbers in, you'll find that this is, again, exoteric, esoteric, those things that they called, those things hidden. So in the names of the Hollywood stars, that in their birth all the way through child actresses to adults, that their main goal, again, as an actor, is hypocrisy. So I will talk later also about her mother's role in Psycho. Now, unfortunately, Jamie Lee dealt with drugs and alcohol, which would be typical for one that was in such a circumstance. The pressure must have been tremendous to follow in the footsteps of her parents. But it's only natural she could play someone she is not because of the family that she's in. Now, you need to understand, for a good actor or actress, they must become the character that they are portraying. So they lose themselves and gain some other spirit. So as I go through this, following actors and their problems, which manifested while preparing for a role or soon after, let's just a quick look at the DSM-5 mental dictionary. Now, I've talked about the DSM-5 before. If you're in psychology, it's not one that I say as a guideline that I would follow. But again, the human nature, whether you have one that is abnormal psychology, that these disorders are just simply categorized, and that's all that we're doing here. So mental disorders or mental illness, meaning one being sick of the mind, that one of the top of the list is clinical depression, anxieties, bipolar, dementia. Now, dementia can also have different, one that wouldn't be of spirit, because you got to remember, when you have an individual that is born as a human, okay, and then a spirit of God is placed into them, that they can fall under a curse, a generational curse. They can be under a hex, a vex, or spell. They can later in life even go into sin that causes these disorders, like schizophrenia, that can come later in life, 18 up through 20. So you can have different disorders manifest because they're time released. It was part of the curse, or they ventured into some type of sin. Now, attention deficit actually falls under this, and hyperactivity disorder, excessive compulsive disorder. These are ones that are not normal. So we also, as I mentioned, schizophrenia, meaning you may hear voices along with hallucinations. And it's interesting that autism is part of this when we know for a fact that in this classification that this is brought in through man. Those of vaccinations, chemtrails, heavy metals, toxins, poisons. Okay? Again, post-traumatic disorder. Like this is one bringing in trauma. One that I'm very familiar with, borderline personality disorders. And then finally, phobias of fear. All classified in a neural development disorder. Again, being one that is a externalizing disorder or internalizing disorder, a neurocognitive, all classified in DSM-5. And so in order for actors to play a psychopath, to play some type of overachiever, someone who's abused, they then enter into this mental illness of their character. And by doing so, the doors are open to the demonic. Some tragically, unfortunately, know this too well. Some not knowing publicly at all what happens to them. So otherwise behind, you see an actor for a while, you see an actress for a while, they disappear. You don't really know what happened to them. And unfortunately, many I'm going to be talking about, because I have quite a few examples here that are very hard cases, some leading into death, that they basically, it's time to pay the piper. When selling your soul or into agreement with those who are demonic, this unfortunately leads to a demise. So without repenting in any case and confessing to Jesus Christ, that is your Lord and Savior, believing unto him, these actors' souls are lost. Now, there can be redemption. They can come out. They can be delivered. God promised a way out for all of us. So now spirits of those that are demonic, unfortunately, are basically in the middle of all this, as we call Hollywood. Some of these come in as curses within the family because of the generations that go back to London, that go back to Russia, that go back to Yugoslavia, that go back to Italy, go back, into a history of family. Just like when I do deliverance for the Hispanic, when I was in Phoenix, I did a lot. I would have Aztec, I would have Mayan, right? And those hold specific sacrifices. Just like Italian, vendetta is a curse, meaning that you'll never forget and that you'll always retaliate in trying to return what was brought your way. But mostly those who are under such things never intentionally intended to be this way, but by behaviors invited into their minds and bodies these behaviors. So when you become an actor, when you become one that's inspired to do so, you didn't know what you're really getting into. You saw the Hollywood fame, you may felt led into it, which actually may have been an iniquitous pull, and by doing so was something that took you from the real destiny that God had for you. Let me point out that a lot of the musicians out there that really are talented, I mean, when someone can really sing, someone can really compose and really put the notes to the paper and bring out the passion in some of these songs, that they were really intended by God to sing praises to the Lord. And there was unfortunately, a demonic led them to go another way. This happens a lot. Now, unfortunately, some have sold their soul. And of course, then again, with acting, with movies, one, for instance, Margot Kidder, bipolar, unfortunately, we knew her basically from Superman and Amityville Horror, that in her sickness, in her demonic issues, in her phobias and those things, whether professional or not, there's a very good chance that she was monarched. A lot of the female stars are monarched, coming directly out of MK Ultra, satanic ritual abuse, some type of programming. London, by the way, you need to understand that a lot of these London actors and even Australian actors, that there is a cult basis in their family. A lot of the witches that I've dealt with over the years that came for deliverance, that their lives were upside down, that they needed to get away from it, a lot of them actually were on the streets of London practicing witchcraft. And I can remember one in particular who came in with a goiter full of cancer, and the deliverance ministry that I was in at the time, I was still being trained, that when there was full repentance, full renouncing, and then the spirits behind those things that were trying to kill her, that within a week, that goiter underneath her throat full of cancer went away. That is a miracle. That is the power of God. Do you see this in the church? Do you see this in evangelists? Do you see this in those that you would call the mainstream churches? No, you don't. But the power of God is there through the blood of Jesus Christ, that regardless of who they are, they can be healed. So Margot Kidder, unfortunately, is no longer with us. And through this torment that she was in for years, she would come and go. But I just can't imagine what she went through. If she could have been delivered, she would still have today. Now, Shelley Duvall is another one. You know, you saw her in Popeye, you saw her in The Shining, and she lives basically as a homeless person. The last I heard, it was either in Florida or Texas. It was about a year and a half ago. On Facebook, there was a clip of her, and I've kind of lost contact. I don't know where she's at anymore. I don't even know if she's alive. But in either case, the movie The Shining itself, to prepare for such a role of fear, and then the whole circumstance being one of paranormal in the first place, was definitely an open door. And then we've got Joaquin Phoenix. You remember the movie Walking the Line with Johnny Cash? He, by the way, when he was in Signs with Mel Gibson, I think potentially it may have been one of the first things. Now, you know, his brother, River Phoenix, died. She was only 23 back in '93. When we see Joaquin Phoenix, when he did Walking the Line, he worked so hard to be Johnny Cash that he lost himself. He went off the edge. He became a very strange person there for a while, imploded, even tried to do rap or something like that, failed at that. I understand he's making a comeback, but you understand that when you open the door to these groups, they will come in. You give demons an inch, they'll take a mile. And of course, the death of his brother River Phoenix with drugs and alcohol or the overdosing, again, a lot of this is done to relieve pain. Now, Mel Gibson, basically the pain in the neck to the liberals and Hollywood Jews. Now, I like Mel Gibson. I like his movies. That in all of this craziness, that in it, I believe, really started with Lethal Weapon. You may remember a scene where he had to become one of such craziness in Lethal Weapon that in a straitjacket, he dislocated his shoulder to try and work his way out of the straitjacket. Now, with that type of behavior can be one that in your role, when you try and get into it, again, like hypnosis can be something that allows it in. Now, you know that he was the director of The Passion of Christ, but unfortunately is based on Catholicism. And when he did the movie Apocalypto, which actually was a very masterfully done, he is a great director. There's no question. I do like him as an actor. In fact, I just like the guy, regardless of his shortcomings. That since the pain in the neck of Hollywood, then go for it. But Apocalypto was one that really showed the demonic side of those things that took place in Central and South America. And the liberals absolutely hated it because what it did is it really truly revealed the sickness of such behaviors. Now, the Hacksaw Ridge movie that he directed was incredible. If you have not seen that movie, I would recommend seeing it. Now, I will tell you that it is very bloody, But we need to remember and understand what our World War II generation went through, what they were up against. Such a demonic realm, such as the Japanese at the time, that in their ability to do what they did, the Japanese, that it showed again the very evil that we were up against. Now, the United States in itself, we need to understand, was used to bring in the New World Order. We know this in World War I, World War II, and those things that Trump are setting up for World War III. But again, I see Hacksaw Ridge as a tribute to the absolute bravery of the men and women of that time, that unfortunately as we lose them one at a time, the very nature of spirit that they had that was the defense of this country, is we're losing it a little bit at a time. Isabella Avante, she did the movie Possession in 1981. Now there was a subway scene where she was terribly tormented and was showing possession, where a spirit was taken over. She was basically falling to the ground and so forth. That this was one of the most amazing scenes filmed of such a thing. But unfortunately, it took her years of therapy to come out of this. In fact, she never did a role again that ever had anything to do with it, because it of spiritual entry into her soul that she never recovered. Okay? Adrian Brody, if you're familiar with him, some of you might remember the movie The Breach, where he basically played one that was less fortunate in intellect. And then he did the movie Splice, which showed transhumanism, a basic female crossbreed. That in his roles in 2002 of a Holocaust survivor, that in his starving of himself and getting into the role, which would be a little bit like fasting. One of the reasons of fasting is when you're in Christ, when you're trying to basically become back into relationship, fasting is a way of opening up your spirit. But in this case, with the fasting that he did in order to look to simulate a Holocaust victim, by the way, there's more to that story than we're ever told, that, you know, if you get a chance, research the German people after World War II, that too was a Holocaust. But in either case, the damage that was done to his spirit, he basically went into hiding. He could not function for a long time. I understand that he's making somewhat of a comeback, but in either case, this was something that altered and changed him for forever. Now, when I talk about the Holocaust, to understand, and I'm not going to go into too much addressing, that in this, that the propaganda was one thing, that things were not sure. Because the German people after World War II suffered greatly in the millions, were allowed to death, to die in camps, that many of what we saw was actually, that on the video, what we see to the detriment of humanity was actually what the United States did to the German people. And maybe sometime I'll do a complete a show on that. Okay, let's see. Oh, Colin Firth, basically The King's Speech, which was a great movie, that basically the next generation, or the bloodline, for George VI, which is a reptilian bloodline, by the way, that those that are in royalty today have confessed of having that bloodline, of coming from Transylvania, not truly being of English, but more of German descent, that in this, in his role that he did to play the Sixth, that in his lack of verbal skills, meaning George VI, not able to speak publicly, that when Colin then came into this role and basically thrown himself into it so much that he, to this day, has not able to come out of it. In interviews and different times when he's privately with his friends, He'll stammer, he'll stutter, he'll still do the same things that were part of basically the King's Speech movie. And so again, when we see this, that now today, he had to even get a coach, just as he did in the movie, to bring him back to speech, to get away from this. And where did we see this before? Well, Hitler himself. He had to basically learn how to speak publicly in order for those public to basically embrace what he said. So Colin Firth, actor, was also known in Kingsman. Now, if you have not seen the movie Kingsman, I did a show on it when it first came out back in 2014, 2015. And basically, the Kingsman is an extension or something beyond MI5, MI6, and Secret Service. And it was based on the fact of using cell phone technology, psychotronics, to bring insanity, hysteria, to bring just absolute destruction to people. So throwing himself so deep into this that there was a scene within that movie that took place within a church. Activation of the cell phones, and everyone in the church had a cell phone, caused everyone to turn upon themselves. That scene is one of the bloodiest, is one of the most horrific, one of the most violent, one of the most shocking scenes, which was perfectly orchestrated. I'm sure they did a lot of takes on it, but the way you watch it, as if it's all one take. And it just basically goes on to the point where everybody within the church kills off themselves. They attack each other, they stab, they shoot, they strangle, they beat. It's just amazing. And the only one left is him when he leaves. And that alone, again, is something that is, when involved in such things, it's very hard to come out of that character. And so when we understand that electronics or psychotronics is also used in mind control, brainwashing, part of irritation to cause disturbances between people, maybe even to a point of violence, that again, I wonder how much of the Hollywood, those that have been going through the MK Ultra, that electronics played a part of this. Because as I did the show on the Montauk project, that was a lot of it, showing psychotronics capability to basically cause mass insanity. And I've said this before, that I believe that is one of the goals of this. Again, playing the role of royalty, which is demonic, opens doors that need the blood of Christ to close. Now, Hugh Laurie, known as his role in House, the basic doctor know-it-all, he is an amazing actor. Now, I don't actually really care for the guy because I can see right through him. Note, I believe Hugh Laurie, the British actor, is possessed. There is no question that as I look at him, if he were to come into my office, it would be my office going in lockdown, because he's got some big boys in him, which are probably one of the reasons that he's able to do such a great job in his role playing. Now, in one of the shows, he said to a patient who was actually religious or believed in God, that in it, that they were delusional, that in it, basically, they had a psychosis. And I imagine that in reality, that was actually pointed at God itself, to say that God didn't exist. And because of this, I believe that it was the nail in the coffin for his demise. Now, Laurie, as I mentioned, is a great actor. When one comes to fame, to the degree that they are, or he is, that they definitely sell themselves out, meaning their souls, and he still limps to this day, getting into the role that he played in House. Now, that's kind of weird, and I believe, again, that this is one of the reasons that we have to be careful about what we let in. Bob Hawkins, who played in Roger Rabbit, it was one of the first animated where you had live actors and cartoons playing at the same time to the level that they played, that because he spent so much time speaking on the set to something that wasn't there, that later they dubbed in the cartoon, that in it, he was hallucinating with schizophrenia. These basic symptoms allowed him to act as if there was someone there when there was no one there at all. And unfortunately, even after the taping and they were done filming, he continued to hallucinate so much that he still imagined that Roger Rabbit was sitting in a chair next to him in a room. This, of course, caused such distress on him that in it, basically going into delusion. And it's a shame because in reality, he could be delivered. All right? So when you see someone who hallucinates, let's say that you go into the streets of Seattle. The last time that I was in Seattle, I ended up in Chinatown. It seemed like every other person on the street was schizophrenic. They literally, people everywhere were holding conversations with those that were not there. Actually, what they were doing is they were talking to spirits. They were talking to demons. They were talking to the familiar spirits or those that were part of the possession on the outside. Again, holding conversations with those in the inside. And if you've ever met someone that has been completely taken over by the demonic spirits, sometimes it's hard to tell when you're speaking to them, especially when I'm doing an interview and I try and do deliverance, whether it's really the demon or the human. And there was one individual that was so bad, and I've talked about this before, that I cursed his demons to never be able to say the gentleman's father's name again. So when I was working with this guy, and I suspected that it was actually a demon that I was talking to, I would say, "What's your father's name?" And the demons would stumble over themselves because they could not say the man's father's name. But when the human was up, the individual was awake, and I was at least talking to the core person, he would say his father's name. And it was one of the ways that I was able to distinguish this. So you can imagine with this man seeing Roger Rabbit everywhere that he went, that would be very hard to take. Now, understand too, Keith Ledger, that in the filming of The Dark Knight, and most of us know who Keith Ledger is, and it's a tragic shame, but again, when one enters into such things, these things can be so overtaking to the soul that in a lot of cases, as I mentioned before, maybe not unknowing, but I believe that they do know. I believe that there's always a Holy Spirit warning. I believe that there's always a choice to make, and unfortunately, they make the wrong choice. So Keith Ledger, known as the last role that he did as the Joker in The Dark Knight, his tragic death, again, is one that shows that when he played the role of a psychopath, that in my opinion, he could not come back out of it. And so whether it was suicide or just trying to soothe this torment with the drugs, that in either case, that led to his demise. When basically you absorb yourself in such character, it becomes who you are. And in his isolation, he said that that was exactly what happened to him. You know, when you try and become a psychopath in a role, then you're actually allowing the psychopathic demons to go. So in any case, this also always includes pharmakia. Now, pharmakia is drugs, which is in relation to source. That with this, again, trying to medicate oneself. Now, Charlie Huon, known for later in his career, mixing accent, crossing over to American, that in his role playing, he could not then assimilate. He could not come back to who he was. He lost his British accent and attempts to try and get it back, even being coached, that when he was in his interviews, he would switch back and forth. Well, this tells me multiple personalities. This tells me such confusion that, again, he lost who he was. So in his interviews, which I've seen some of the films to it, it is quite disturbing to see someone go back and forth. Now, the old movie with Janet Leigh is no exception to any of this, playing the woman who gets stabbed to death in a shower. Now, through the rest of her life, she had such a phobia of showers that she never took a shower again. She publicly admitted this, only bathing. And any time that she had in her travels, if there was no bath, that there was never a shower curtain involved. There was always a door opened or facing the door, and simply taking care of business as quick as she could and get out, because it caused such fear and trauma onto her that in reality, the post-traumatic stress of doing this movie, again, allowed in phobia demons. Now, let's look at others that are in Hollywood like Jim Carrey. Without a doubt, are multiples and full of demons. Because when you see Jim Carrey do the characters and the acting that he's doing, that it is, without a doubt, a manifestation of the particular spirits involved. Now, I also believe that he's heavily into the occult. I believe that he's one of the top wizards or the top Luciferian leaders of Hollywood now. And when this took place, his girlfriend mysteriously died, supposedly in some suicide or so forth. As I've said before, if you take such positions, there is a price to pay. And then one of the texts that came, I don't remember if it was in Twitter or what, one that actually led to that potential of being the truth. So in it, when we see those who do such things, especially comedians like Robin Williams, now deceased, that in itself we have to understand that in order for him to behave the way that he did, that he lost himself. Whether it was multiple personalities, whether it was demonization, again, reminds me of someone like Will Ferrell, Jack Black, Brand, Johnny Depp, for instance, even Richard Pryor, now deceased. That whenever I look at them, I can tell that there's demons all over them. It's actually a shame. Johnny Depp in himself, which, by the way, I believe that there are multiples out there of him. I believe that there's been clones of him. But in either case, when we look at the finalization of that society, of Hollywood, that even coming into politics, such as Ronald Reagan, puppet of the Bushes, who basically attempted to break away from being commanded by Daddy Bush, Bush Sr., that it almost got himself killed. Now, Hinckley, the MK Ultra assassin, who basically was a sacrifice of the Hinckley family because of the bloodline relation to the Rothschilds. Now, there is one scene that, again, reminds me that in reality that Ronald Reagan was just an actor. That in the movie Back to the Future, this was mentioned by the so-called mad scientist that was in there, the old guy, that when there was a relation to the past, which would have been the future in reverse, that he says Ronald Reagan, the actor, the way that that was punctuated, the way that that was defined, was telling us exactly that that was the case, that he was more than an actor, put into position, again, for Daddy Bush, again, taking over that role. So as I end this week, and looking around in this world, seeing as it is, that this world is nothing but a stage. That the actors that are involved, or everyone that we run into in the store, people that we work with, pretending to be someone we're not, that it has come to a point of such infiltration that it is just absolutely a heartbreak to see those in bondage that believe that they have to be a particular type of person or they won't be accepted or they won't fit in. Now, many people are in fear. Fear is one of the main aspects of allowing demons in. This can come through childhood. As I've mentioned before, sometimes children or even teenagers or a sibling or even adult sometimes think that it's funny to scare a child coming down the hall and jumping out around the corner and going boo. Well, that is a fracture of the soul. At that moment that the trauma takes in and they shake from the experience of this fear is an open door that allows demons in. This is one of the things that takes place during satanic ritual abuse. This is one of the things that takes place during monarchy, MK Ultra. This is what can be brought in through a vehicle accident. So this would be trauma through accidents, or you can have trauma through the manipulation of satanic ritual abuse, where let's say one individual that I knew of had a puppy when he was only about 3 years old, maybe 4 years old, was killed in front of him. It was the puppy that he loved as a child. And this was so traumatic to him that this fracturing was one of the first implementations of altars to be programmed into him, that in time, when he went on to Washington, he became what is known as a spin doctor, which would have been during the times of the Clinton administration. And if you're familiar with a spin doctor, they're ones that when a candidate, when a president, when a senator gets in trouble, whether through sexual misconduct or whatever, they come in and they put a spin on everything, or they cause something else to happen that takes the focus off of the circumstances of that individual. But in either case, this programming that has placed society today is a social engineering. And again, when we look and connect the dots, many of this comes back to Hollywood. So these actors that I'm talking about tonight, is actually very sad, because many of them probably did not know what they were getting into. And many of them are dead now. I can't even imagine the ones that I haven't even talked about. You know, for a short time, they have a fame for a while, then they disappear, especially with childhood acting. Many of them, just like Shirley Temple, she's a classic case where on stage or on the film set, they actually had a black box that was actually like an ice box, which had a, you know, back then the ice boxes had the cube of ice, that they would lock the children in this box, bring them to a temperature, and then let them out. This is part of the programming. Now, unfortunately, Shirley Temple was subject to that. And so, as you note, that this world is nothing more than a stage, we are all a part. But the question is, are you an actor or are you in reality? Are you a hypocrite or are you in truth? Are you one who not only knows what's going on, but does not accept this ploy or this attempt to alter and change reality? Because when you do, you will find that we're all held accountable, and we will give account. So again, are you real or are you an actor? Because God knows your heart, and right now is the time to get right while you still can. All right, I'm just going to finish off tonight with letting you know that as I see the liberal left-right position, the conservative position that's going on in the media, especially with Facebook, please don't buy into any of that. Do not get involved. Do not allow this to be something that irritates you to the point that you become angered. Because when we understand what's really going on, then we can withdraw ourselves and not take offense. it's very important to not take offense. And believe me, it's hard for me too. None of this that I'm talking about is just like I've overcome it and I don't think of it or I have to deal with it. This is a struggle for all of us. Because you see, the demons, the spirits, they never give up. They don't sleep, they don't eat, they don't rest. They're up 24/7, 365 days a year. They've been in our generations, they've been in our families, and they will continue. The point of it is that we put ourselves in a position under the blood of Christ that we're able to sustain ourselves in truth. Because in truth, as we know, that those who do this will be set free. There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And just remember, you are an heir to the kingdom, as I mentioned last week. That it's very important to know that you are loved, you are adored, you are treasured, you are a jewel in the eye of the Most High God, and that you have worth. And when someone tries to tell you that you do not have worth, when someone tries to condemn you, this condemnation comes from Lucifer, for he goes before the throne of God accusing the brethren. And when we find that this lie and this deception that takes place, that infiltrates into our society, infiltrates into our lives and our families, that we find that the very evil that we stand against can be in those that we love. And that makes it very trying and very difficult. So as I've done shows in the past about spring cleaning, getting away from those that are influential to the point that causes you to misbehave or to sell yourself out or do something you wish you hadn't do not allow yourself to be in that position. Because no matter how strong you think you are, that being chiseled at a little bit each day will cause you to fall. And so it's very important to take care of yourself. And as you do this, again, you start to come back to who you really are. Because who are you? Are you the one that God intended you to be? Or are you some creation, some monster that you've turned into that you don't even like yourself? And unfortunately, that happens with many, many people. So just again, when we're able to humble ourselves and just come before Christ, this is when the Holy Spirit comes in and just sets us free. Because those who have pride, those who try and take care of business on their own, they're not going to succeed. All right?